Vivian Blake Harrington couldn't believe her eyes. She blinked once, twice, hoping that somehow the scene playing out across the street would magically transform into something else, anything else. But reality remained stubbornly unchanged as her husband of 15 years stepped out of the boutique hotel with a woman Vivian had never seen before, a woman who looked nothing like what she would have expected. The autumn breeze carried the sound of the woman's laughter across the street to where Vivian sat frozen in her luxury SUV. She had only stopped to pick up Garrett's favorite coffee, a peace offering after their argument that morning about his increasingly frequent business trips. Now, her manicured fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white, the coffee growing cold in the cup holder beside her. "That can't be what I think it is," she whispered to herself, watching as Garrett placed his hand on the small of the woman's back, in that familiar way he once reserved only for her. The intimacy of the gesture sent a jolt of pain through Vivian's chest. But what truly bewildered her wasn't just the fact that her husband was clearly having an affair, it was his choice of mistress. The woman was so ordinary. No, that wasn't quite right. Vivian, who had built an empire on her understanding of aesthetics and beauty, struggled to find the right words. The woman's mousy brown hair hung limply around her shoulders, not a hint of style or product visible. She wore no makeup, not even a touch of mascara or lip balm, and her clothes looked like they'd been selected purely for function rather than form. Loose-fitting jeans, practical flat shoes, and an oversized sweater that did absolutely nothing for her figure. As a highly sought-after image consultant whose waiting list stretched months long, Vivian could see at least 15 immediate improvements this woman could make. The thought was so absurd that a strangled laugh escaped her lips. Here she was, being betrayed by her husband, and all she could think about was how badly his mistress needed a makeover. "He left me for that?" she murmured incredulously. The rational part of her brain tried to intervene. Perhaps this wasn't what it seemed. Maybe this was a client, a colleague, a distant relative. But then Garrett leaned down and kissed the woman goodbye. Not a passionate embrace, but a tender, familiar kiss that spoke of comfortable intimacy, and Vivian felt her world tilt on its axis. She sank lower in her seat as Garrett walked the woman to her car, an unremarkable sedan that matched its owner in its complete lack of distinction. When the woman finally drove away, Garrett stood watching her leave, a soft smile playing on his lips that Vivian hadn't seen in years. Only when his phone rang did he snap out of his reverie. He checked the screen, frowned slightly, and then schooled his features before answering. Vivian knew without a doubt he was speaking to her. She could picture her own name flashing on his screen. Wife. Her own phone sat silently in her purse. She hadn't called him. Someone else had, perhaps from the office, or maybe one of their friends. Not that they had many mutual friends anymore. Garrett had gradually disconnected from her social circle over the years, claiming he didn't fit in with the beauty and fashion crowd. Now she understood why. Vivian waited until Garrett disappeared back into the hotel before starting her car. Her mind raced with questions and emotions as she navigated through the busy downtown streets. 15 years of marriage, and she'd never once suspected he might be unfaithful. They'd had their problems, certainly. What couple didn't? But infidelity had never crossed her mind. Her successful career had taken her around the world, transforming the appearances of everyone from politicians to movie stars. She'd created her own cosmetics line 5 years ago, and its meteoric success had her face splashed across magazines and billboards. Vivian Blake Harrington was a brand now, synonymous with beauty and transformation. And here was her husband, finding comfort in the arms of a woman who looked like she'd never set foot in a salon. When she arrived home, a stunning penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, Vivian poured herself a generous glass of wine. She kicked off her designer heels and curled up on the white leather sofa, staring out at the skyline as the afternoon sun painted the buildings in golden light. Her phone buzzed with a text from Garrett. Got held up at the meeting. Don't wait up for dinner. Love you. The casual lie made her stomach turn. She took another sip of wine, letting the cool liquid burn down her throat. Love you, she repeated mockingly. Clearly not enough. Vivian's thoughts drifted to the woman again. There had been something in her face, beneath the unflattering haircut and non-existent makeup routine, a kind of quiet confidence that had struck Vivian as unusual. The woman hadn't been conventionally attractive, but there had been something about her that had caught Garrett's attention, enough to risk his marriage of 15 years. What does she have that I don't? Vivian asked the empty room. The silence that followed felt oppressive. She stood up abruptly, nearly spilling her wine, and walked to the large mirror that hung in their entryway. Her reflection stared back at her. Flawless makeup, expertly highlighted burgundy hair, designer outfit that perfectly accentuated her figure. Vivian had spent her entire adult life perfecting her appearance, teaching others how to present their best selves to the world. Her livelihood depended on her belief that outer beauty mattered, that first impressions could open doors, that the right look could change your life. And yet, her husband had chosen someone who seemed to embody the opposite of everything she stood for. She pulled out her phone and opened her social media app, where millions of followers awaited her next beauty tip or product recommendation. The disparity between her public persona and her private reality felt like a cruel joke. Here she was, influential enough that a single mention of a product could send it flying off the shelves, yet powerless to keep her husband's attention. As she scrolled mindlessly through her feed, an idea began to form, something so audacious that it made her breath catch. What if, instead of confronting Garrett immediately, she found a way to get close to this woman, to understand what had drawn him to her? Vivian knew she should be feeling rage, devastation, grief, and those emotions were certainly swirling beneath the surface. But the predominant feeling was a strange, detached curiosity. It was almost as if she were analyzing a fascinating case study, rather than her own crumbling marriage. She placed her wine glass on the marble countertop and began to pace. If she were to confront Garrett now, he would deny everything. He would create some plausible explanation, and without concrete evidence, it would be his word against what she'd seen from across a busy street. No, confrontation wasn't the answer. At least, not yet. What she needed was information, understanding. She needed to know who this woman was and what she represented in Garrett's life. Pulling out her laptop, Vivian hesitated only briefly before typing a description of the hotel into the search bar. It was one of those boutique establishments that catered to the creative professional, architects, designers, and the like. Not the type of place Garrett would typically frequent for his engineering work. That was her first clue. Next, she scrolled through Garrett's recent credit card statements, which were linked to her account for their shared expenses. There it was, regular charges at the hotel's restaurant over the past 6 months. Always on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always around lunchtime. She moved on to his calendar, which they'd shared since the early days of their marriage. He'd gotten sloppy, or perhaps confident, that she never checked it anymore. Several recurring meetings with the initials ED were blocked out, corresponding perfectly with the hotel restaurant charges. ED, Vivian murmured. Eleanor Dowd? It took less than 20 minutes of focused searching online to find her. Eleanor Dowd, architect, specializing in sustainable urban development. Her professional website was simple but functional. Much like the woman herself, there were a few project photos, but only one small, grainy headshot tucked away on the About page. Even in that tiny image, Vivian could see she was the same woman. Eleanor had an impressive portfolio of work, but seemed to fly under the radar of the high-end design world. No splashy features in architectural magazines, no celebrity clients, though her credentials were excellent. She focused primarily on community projects, affordable housing developments, public spaces in underserved neighborhoods, schools. Vivian found herself oddly impressed. This wasn't some young, opportunistic woman looking to snare a successful man. Eleanor Dowd was accomplished in her own right, seemingly content to do meaningful work without seeking the spotlight. A plan began to crystallize in Vivian's mind. Her company had been discussing opening a flagship store for months now, something beyond the department store counters where her products were currently sold. She needed an architect, and Eleanor Dowd had just become the perfect candidate. With a strange sense of calm, Vivian drafted an email to Eleanor's professional address, inquiring about her availability for a new commercial project. She mentioned nothing about Garrett or their connection, positioning herself simply as a successful businesswoman seeking architectural services. After sending the email, Vivian sat back and took a deep breath. What she was doing was either brilliantly strategic or completely insane. She wasn't entirely sure which. But beneath the shock and betrayal, a small, vindictive part of her savored the thought of meeting this woman face to face, of understanding exactly what had lured her husband away. "If he's going to cheat on me," she whispered to the empty apartment, "the least he could do is choose someone who knows how to apply foundation properly." The absurdity of the statement made her laugh, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed off the high ceilings and came back to her like a stranger's voice. Vivian Blake Harrington, who had built her reputation on transforming others, was about to embark on the most unusual makeover project of her career. And somewhere beneath the hurt and indignation, a tiny voice whispered that perhaps she was the one who would end up transformed. Eleanor Dowd's response came the following morning. A prompt, professional email expressing interest in Vivian's project and suggesting they meet to discuss the details. Vivian read the message 3 times, searching for any hint that Eleanor might know who she really was. There was none. The architect's tone was cordial but businesslike, showing no recognition of her potential client as the wife of Garrett Harrington. They arranged to meet at Vivian's downtown office 2 days later. This gave Vivian ample time to do what she did best: prepare. She researched Eleanor's previous projects more thoroughly, studying the woman's architectural philosophy and aesthetic sensibilities. She drafted detailed notes about her fictional flagship store requirements, and most importantly, she practiced maintaining her composure when face-to-face with the woman who was sleeping with her husband. When Thursday morning arrived, Vivian dressed with even more care than usual. She selected a crimson power suit that highlighted her confidence and authority, paired with subtle gold jewelry and her signature fragrance, a custom scent created exclusively for her by a renowned French perfumer. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled in loose waves that framed her face perfectly. If she was going to confront her husband's mistress, even under the guise of a business meeting, she would do so looking absolutely impeccable. At precisely 10 o'clock, her assistant announced Eleanor's arrival. Vivian took a steadying breath, adjusted her expression to one of polite interest, and said, "Please send her in." The woman who entered Vivian's office looked slightly more polished than she had outside the hotel, but only marginally so. Eleanor wore simple black trousers, a navy blazer over a white button-down shirt, and practical low-heeled boots. Her hair was pulled back in a functional ponytail, and she wore what appeared to be just a touch of mascara and lip balm. Concessions to the professional setting, perhaps. "Miss Dowd," Vivian said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I'm Vivian Blake." She deliberately used her maiden name, waiting to see if there was any recognition. There wasn't. "Please, call me Eleanor," the architect replied, shaking Vivian's hand firmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I've actually used some of your products before. That 24-hour foundation is quite remarkable." Vivian smiled thinly. "I'm glad you enjoyed it. Though I must say, you hardly seem like someone who spends much time on makeup." The words came out more pointed than she'd intended, but Eleanor didn't seem offended. "You're right," she laughed, setting her portfolio on the conference table. "My sister gave me a gift set of your line for Christmas last year. Said it was foolproof enough that even I couldn't mess it up. I save it for important meetings and presentations." The honest admission caught Vivienne off guard. Most women would have been intimidated in her presence, scrambling to appear more beauty-conscious than they were. Eleanor's candor was refreshing, if irritating. "Well," Vivienne said, gesturing toward the seating area, "shall we discuss the project?" For the next hour, they reviewed Vivienne's fabricated plans for a luxury cosmetics boutique. Eleanor asked thoughtful questions about the brand identity, customer experience, and functional requirements of the space. She sketched quick conceptual drawings as they talked, her hands moving with confident precision across the paper. Despite herself, Vivienne was impressed. The woman clearly knew what she was doing professionally, even if her personal presentation left much to be desired. "I notice most of your portfolio focuses on community projects," Vivienne observed, watching Eleanor's reaction carefully. "What draws you to my high-end retail concept? It seems quite different from your usual work." Eleanor tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so unconsciously feminine that Vivienne could suddenly see why Garrett might find her attractive. There was an unaffected quality to her movements, a naturalness that contrasted sharply with the calculated perfection that surrounded Vivienne daily. "I believe good design should be accessible to everyone, regardless of income level or social status," Eleanor replied. "That's why I focus on community spaces. But the principles of thoughtful, human-centered design apply whether I'm creating affordable housing or a luxury boutique." She smiled, revealing slightly crooked front teeth that somehow added to her charm rather than detracting from it. "Plus, I won't deny that a high-profile commercial project would be good for my practice's visibility." Vivienne nodded slowly. "And how did you hear about my brand? Are you interested in beauty and fashion?" Eleanor laughed again, that warm, genuine laugh Vivienne had heard across the street. "Honestly, not particularly. My world revolves around spatial relationships and materials, not contouring techniques. But I do appreciate craftsmanship in any field. And from what I understand, your products are exceptional in their category." "I see," Vivienne said, struggling to maintain her professional demeanor. "So you believe you can design an effective space for a business whose purpose you don't particularly value?" The question was deliberately provocative, but Eleanor didn't take the bait. "I don't need to be a beauty enthusiast to understand what your customers are seeking," she replied thoughtfully. "They want transformation, confidence, a moment of luxury in their day. My job is to create a space that facilitates that experience." She leaned forward slightly. "Just as I don't need to be homeless to design dignified housing for those who are, or a child to create a playful learning environment for a school." The response was so measured and reasonable that Vivienne felt momentarily ashamed of her transparent attempt to provoke the woman. She shifted tactics. "Your approach is refreshing," she admitted, "though I must confess, I'm surprised someone with your talent isn't more established in high-end design circles. Your portfolio shows remarkable skill. Yet I hadn't heard of you before researching architects for this project." Eleanor shrugged, seemingly unbothered by the implied criticism. "I made a conscious choice to focus on projects that align with my values. The high-end market is saturated with talented designers creating beautiful spaces for those who can afford them. I wanted to bring that same level of thought and care to projects that serve the broader community." "Noble," Vivienne commented, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from her voice. "But surely you must find it limiting financially." "There are different ways to measure success," Eleanor replied simply. "I earn enough to live comfortably and do work that matters to me. What more could I want?" The question hung in the air between them. What more indeed? A married man, perhaps? Vivienne thought bitterly, but she held her tongue. As their meeting continued, Vivienne found herself increasingly conflicted. She had expected to dislike Eleanor intensely, to find her vapid, opportunistic, or at the very least, intimidated by Vivian's success and polished appearance. Instead, she discovered a woman who was intelligent, principled, and utterly comfortable in her own skin. The realization was infuriating. "Well," Vivian said finally, gathering her papers, "your ideas are quite promising. But before we proceed further, I'd like to offer you a proposition." Eleanor tilted her head questioningly. "What kind of proposition?" "A trade of professional services," Vivian explained, the words flowing smoothly despite the thundering of her heart. "You design my flagship store at a reduced rate, and in exchange, I provide you with comprehensive image consulting. New wardrobe, makeup lessons, hair styling, the works." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "That's an unusual offer." "Is it?" Vivian asked innocently. "I couldn't help but notice that your personal presentation doesn't quite match the sophistication of your design sensibility. In the high-end commercial world, clients often expect a certain cohesiveness between the designer and their work." She was being deliberately cruel now, but couldn't seem to stop herself. Some vindictive part of her wanted to hurt this woman, to make her feel inadequate in the way that Vivian herself had felt when seeing her husband kiss Eleanor goodbye. To her surprise, Eleanor didn't seem offended. She considered the offer thoughtfully, then said, "You know, several clients have suggested something similar over the years. I've always resisted, partly out of stubbornness, and partly because I believe my work should speak for itself." She paused, studying Vivian with those intelligent eyes. "But perhaps it's time I reconsidered. Your expertise in your field is undeniable, just as I hope mine is in architecture." Vivian hadn't expected agreement. She had anticipated indignation, perhaps tears, something that would justify her dislike of this woman. Instead, Eleanor's measured response left her off balance once again. "Excellent," she managed, recovering quickly. "We'll schedule your first consultation for next week. I'll have my assistant send you the details." After Eleanor left, Vivian sat alone in her office, staring out at the city skyline. Her plan was in motion now. She would get close to Eleanor, learn what had attracted Garrett to her, and then, what? Reveal herself as the betrayed wife? Humiliate them both somehow? The path forward suddenly seemed less clear than it had yesterday. Her phone buzzed with a text from Garrett. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." Another lie. She wondered if he was meeting Eleanor again, or if Thursdays were reserved for their lunchtime rendezvous. The thought made her stomach clench painfully. That evening, Vivian found herself standing in front of her expansive closet, surveying the meticulously organized designer pieces that defined her public persona. For the first time, she saw her wardrobe through Eleanor's eyes, excessive, perhaps even superficial, compared to the architect's practical approach to dress. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself. "I'm not the one who should be questioning my choices." Yet the doubt had taken root. Vivian had built her career on the premise that appearance matters profoundly, that the right look could transform not just how others saw you, but how you saw yourself. Eleanor seemed to challenge that fundamental belief simply by existing as she was, apparently unconcerned with the polish and perfection Vivian had dedicated her life to achieving. When Garrett finally came home shortly after midnight, Vivian pretended to be asleep. She listened to him moving quietly through their bedroom, the familiar sounds of him undressing and preparing for bed. When he slipped beneath the covers beside her, she caught the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume, subtle but unmistakable. Not the expensive fragrance she herself wore, but something simpler, more understated. Like Eleanor herself, Vivian lay awake long after Garrett's breathing had deepened into sleep, staring at the ceiling and contemplating the woman who had unwittingly walked into her trap. She had expected the initial meeting to solidify her resentment, to confirm her superiority. Instead, she found herself troubled by unexpected questions about her own life choices and the values she had held so dear. "What do you see in her, Garrett?" she whispered in the darkness. glancing at her husband's sleeping form. "What does she give you that I don't?" The questions haunted her until dawn, when she finally drifted into a restless sleep filled with dreams of unfinished buildings and women with no faces. The following Tuesday, Vivian canceled all her afternoon appointments and positioned herself in a cafe across from the boutique hotel where Garrett and Eleanor met regularly. She wore large sunglasses and a scarf draped casually over her hair. Not quite a disguise, but enough to prevent immediate recognition if Garrett happened to glance her way. At precisely 12:30, just as she had anticipated, her husband's sleek black luxury car pulled into the hotel's parking area. He emerged looking polished and confident in one of the custom suits Vivian had insisted he purchase last year. The sight of him preparing to meet another woman while wearing clothes she had selected made her grip her coffee cup so tightly the lid nearly popped off. 15 minutes later, Eleanor arrived in her unremarkable sedan. She wore a simple green dress today, the first time Vivian had seen her in anything other than practical separates. The dress wasn't particularly fashionable, but it complemented Eleanor's figure better than her usual attire, showing that she did indeed possess curves beneath those shapeless clothes. Vivian watched as Eleanor entered the hotel, presumably heading to the restaurant where Garrett waited. She imagined them greeting each other, perhaps with a kiss, sharing a meal and conversation while she sat alone across the street, a knot of anger and confusion tightening in her chest. Her phone chimed with a calendar reminder: Eleanor Dowd, image consultation, 3 o'clock. The irony was almost too perfect. In just a few hours, she would be giving beauty advice to her husband's mistress, who was currently enjoying a romantic lunch with him. Vivian nearly laughed out loud at the absurdity of the situation. She waited another hour, nursing her now cold coffee, before Eleanor and Garrett emerged from the hotel. They walked close together, not quite touching, but clearly comfortable in each other's presence. Garrett said something that made Eleanor laugh, her face lighting up in a way that transformed her ordinary features into something approaching beauty. It was that unguarded joy that struck Vivian most painfully. When was the last time she had made Garrett laugh like that? When had they last shared a moment of simple pleasure in each other's company? Their interactions had become so choreographed over the years: charity galas, industry dinners, carefully curated social media posts, showcasing their perfect life. The spontaneity had leached away so gradually she hadn't even noticed its absence until seeing it reflected in her husband's relationship with another woman. Garrett kissed Eleanor goodbye. Again, not passionately, but with a tenderness that spoke volumes, before they parted ways. Vivian waited until both had driven away before leaving the cafe. She had 2 hours to compose herself before facing Eleanor again. When Eleanor arrived at Vivian's studio for her consultation, there was no indication she had just come from meeting Garrett. She appeared slightly nervous, but excited, like any client about to embark on a makeover journey. "I hope I'm not underdressed for this," she joked, gesturing to her green dress. "Though I suppose that's the whole point of being here." "The dress is actually quite nice," Vivian said, surprising herself with the genuine compliment. "The color suits you. It brings out the gold flecks in your eyes." Eleanor looked startled, then pleased. "Thank you. My sister helped me pick it out for a conference presentation last year. She's always trying to drag me out of my comfort zone fashion-wise." "Oh, your sister sounds wise," Vivian replied, guiding Eleanor to the consultation area she had set up. "Sometimes we need an objective perspective on our appearance." The irony of her words wasn't lost on her. Here she was, about to give an objective perspective to the woman sleeping with her husband. But strangely, as she began the consultation process, analyzing Eleanor's skin tone, facial structure, and body proportions, Vivian found herself slipping into her professional mindset, temporarily setting aside her personal grievances. "You have excellent bone structure," she observed, gently turning Eleanor's face to catch the light. And your skin is remarkably good for someone who doesn't seem to have a regular skincare routine. I wash my face and use sunscreen, Eleanor said with a shrug. Is there more to it than that? Vivienne stared at her incredulously. Is there more? Yes, there's considerably more to it than that for most women. She shook her head in amazement. You've been blessed with naturally good skin. Many would envy that. As the consultation continued, Vivienne found herself genuinely engaged in the process of identifying Eleanor's best features and considering how to enhance them. The architect had a natural elegance to her movements, a quiet poise that had nothing to do with fashion or cosmetics. Properly styled, she could be quite striking. I'm going to create a comprehensive plan for you, Vivienne explained as she made notes. Wardrobe essentials, a simplified skincare routine, basic makeup techniques, nothing too complicated or time-consuming. I can tell you're not someone who wants to spend hours on your appearance. Is it that obvious? Eleanor asked with a self-deprecating smile. It's not a criticism, Vivienne assured her, surprised to find she meant it. Different women have different priorities. The trick is finding a personal style that honors who you are while presenting the best version of yourself to the world. Eleanor considered this thoughtfully. You know, I've always admired women like you who understand the language of beauty and fashion. For me, it's like trying to speak a foreign tongue without knowing the basic vocabulary. I recognize when something looks good, but I have no idea how to create that effect myself. The honest admission touched something in Vivienne. She remembered feeling that way once, long ago, before she had dedicated years to mastering the art of personal presentation. Not everyone had the same interests or aptitudes. That didn't make their contributions less valuable. That's what I'm here for, she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. To translate that language for you. As she demonstrated simple makeup techniques on Eleanor's face, Vivienne was struck by the intimacy of the situation. There was something deeply personal about teaching another woman how to enhance her beauty, about literally touching her face and showing her how to see herself differently. The fact that this particular woman was intimately involved with her husband created a strange, charged atmosphere that Vivienne struggled to navigate. Look, she said, turning Eleanor toward the mirror after applying a subtle but effective makeup look. See how this brings forward your best features without looking overdone? Eleanor stared at her reflection, genuine wonder crossing her face. That's remarkable. I still look like me, just more polished, Vivienne supplied. More intentional. Yes, exactly. Eleanor turned to her with an appreciative smile. You really are talented at this. I can see why you're so successful. The sincere compliment caught Vivienne off guard. She had expected resistance or indifference from Eleanor, not this open appreciation of her skills. Thank you, she said, momentarily disarmed. Now, let's discuss your wardrobe. See, by the end of the 2-hour session, Vivienne had created a comprehensive style plan for Eleanor, complete with specific recommendations for clothing items, accessories, and beauty products. She had even scheduled a shopping trip for the following week, where she would personally help Eleanor select new pieces. As Eleanor prepared to leave, gathering the samples and notes Vivienne had provided, she paused at the door. You know, I was skeptical about this whole image consultation idea, she admitted. I've always believed that my work should speak for itself, that focusing too much on appearance is, well, superficial. She smiled apologetically. No offense intended. None taken, Vivienne replied coolly, though the comment stung more than she cared to admit. But I'm beginning to see that presentation is another form of communication, Eleanor continued thoughtfully. When I design a building, every element communicates something. Values, purpose, relationship to the environment. Perhaps personal style isn't so different. The insight surprised Vivienne. Most clients simply wanted to look better, feel more confident, make a stronger impression. You considered the deeper implications of personal aesthetics as a form of communication. That's a very astute observation, she said, studying Eleanor with newfound curiosity. Most people never make that connection. Eleanor shrugged, that natural, unaffected gesture that somehow communicated more authenticity than all of Vivian's carefully cultivated poise. I suppose we each develop sensitivity to different languages. You understand the language of personal aesthetics. I understand the language of spatial relationships and materiality. And what language does my husband understand? Vivian wanted to ask, but instead she simply nodded and wished Eleanor a good evening. After Eleanor left, Vivian sat alone in her studio, surrounded by the tools of her trade, the makeup palettes and fabric swatches and style guides that had defined her professional life. For the first time, she found herself questioning not just her marriage, but the foundations of her career. Had she been wrong to place so much emphasis on external beauty? Was there something superficial about her life's work, as Eleanor had implied? Or was Eleanor simply justifying her own lack of effort in that arena? That night, when Garrett returned home from his late meeting, Vivian studied him with new eyes. He moved through their luxury apartment with a strange detachment, as if he were merely visiting rather than living there. When had that happened? When had their shared space ceased to feel like a true home to him? "How was your day?" he asked absently, loosening his tie as he poured himself a scotch from the crystal decanter on their bar cart. "Enlightening," Vivian replied truthfully. "I had an interesting new client today, an architect." Garrett's hand froze momentarily, the glass halfway to his lips, before he recovered his composure. "Oh? Anyone I might know?" The casual tone was forced, and Vivian felt a perverse satisfaction in his discomfort. "I doubt it. She specializes in community projects, not the corporate high-rises you work on." He nodded, visibly relieved. "How was the consultation?" "Surprising," Vivian said, watching him carefully. "She's not my typical client. Very natural, unpolished, brilliant in her field, but completely uninterested in fashion or beauty." She paused deliberately. "It's refreshing, actually, to work with someone so authentic." Something flashed in Garrett's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or concern that she might be referring specifically to Eleanor. But he quickly masked it with a non-committal smile. "Sounds interesting. Will you be seeing her again?" "Oh, yes," Vivian said, smiling sweetly. "We've scheduled several follow-up appointments. I think we'll be spending quite a bit of time together." The subtle threat hung in the air between them. Garrett's expression tightened almost imperceptibly before he drained his glass and announced he needed a shower. Vivian watched him retreat to their master bathroom, wondering if he would contact Eleanor to warn her. But how could he? Without revealing that he knew Vivian was her client, information he shouldn't possess if their relationship was truly as innocent as a business lunch? Later that night, Vivian lay awake beside Garrett, listening to his steady breathing and contemplating her next move. Her plan had been to humiliate Eleanor, to prove her own superiority by transforming the other woman, and then revealing the truth about their connection. But after spending time with Eleanor, the vindictive scheme felt increasingly hollow. What would it accomplish, really, beyond causing pain to a woman who, as far as Vivian could tell, had no idea Garrett was married? If anyone deserved her wrath, it was her lying husband, not his unwitting mistress. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to confront him directly. Not yet. Some part of her needed to understand more about this relationship, about what it revealed regarding the failures of her marriage. Because, if she were truly honest with herself, things had been broken between her and Garrett long before Eleanor Dowd entered the picture. As dawn broke over the city skyline, Vivian made a decision. She would continue with the consultations, not to humiliate Eleanor, but to understand her, to learn what this woman possessed that had captivated Garrett so completely, and perhaps, in the process, to discover what was missing from her own carefully curated life. The shopping excursion with Eleanor proved more enjoyable than Vivian had anticipated. They met at an upscale boutique on Saturday morning, where Vivian had arranged for a private shopping experience. Eleanor arrived looking somewhat apprehensive, clutching a reusable coffee cup and wearing what Vivian now recognized as her best outfit, the green dress from their consultation. "I feel like I'm infiltrating a foreign territory," Eleanor admitted as they entered the elegant shop. "I usually buy most of my clothes online or at department stores. Places like this are intimidating." "There's nothing to be intimidated by," Vivian assured her, guiding her through the carefully curated racks. "Think of it as selecting materials for a design project. Each piece serves a purpose and contributes to the overall aesthetic." Eleanor seemed to relax at the analogy. "That makes sense. Form following function, but the form matters too." "Exactly," Vivian said, pleased by how quickly Eleanor grasped the concept. "Let's start with some foundation pieces, well-cut basics that you can mix and match for different occasions." As they moved through the store, Vivian selected items that complemented Eleanor's natural coloring and body type. Simple, elegant pieces that would elevate her look without requiring her to adopt an entirely different aesthetic. To her surprise, Eleanor was an attentive student, asking thoughtful questions about fabric choices, proportions, and versatility. "The key for someone with your lifestyle is efficiency," Vivian explained, holding up a beautifully tailored blazer in a deep teal shade. "You need pieces that transition easily from client meetings to construction sites, that pack well for travel, and that don't require elaborate maintenance." Eleanor nodded appreciatively. "You really understand what I need." "I assumed you'd try to put me in cocktail dresses and stilettos." Vivian laughed, despite herself. "That would hardly be appropriate for someone who spends time on construction sites. Style should enhance your life, not complicate it." They continued through several boutiques, with Eleanor gradually becoming more confident in evaluating potential purchases. By lunchtime, they had assembled a respectable collection of new items, and Vivian suggested they take a break at a nearby cafe. Over salads and sparkling water, their conversation drifted from fashion to careers, and Vivian found herself genuinely interested in Eleanor's perspective on architecture and design. "What drew you to architecture initially?" she asked, watching Eleanor's face animate with passion. "I've always been fascinated by how physical spaces shape human experience," Eleanor explained, gesturing expressively with her fork. "The right building doesn't just provide shelter. It can foster community, inspire creativity, even promote healing. Architecture is powerful that way. It literally structures how we move through the world." Vivian considered this. "I suppose there's a parallel to my work. The right look doesn't just improve appearance. It can change how people perceive you, how they interact with you, and how you feel about yourself," Eleanor added thoughtfully. "I've noticed that even with the small changes you've suggested, the better-fitting clothes, the minimal makeup, I feel more present, somehow, more engaged with the world around me." The comment pleased Vivian more than she wanted to admit. Despite everything, she took pride in her ability to help others present their best selves. "Tell me about your current projects," she said, steering the conversation away from personal territory. "You mentioned community work?" Eleanor's eyes lit up as she described a mixed-income housing development she was designing, an innovative approach that incorporated green spaces, communal areas, and sustainable materials. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and Vivian found herself asking questions about environmental impact, space utilization, and urban planning. "Sorry," Eleanor said eventually, looking embarrassed. "I tend to go on about my work. Not everyone finds floor plans and solar orientation as fascinating as I do." "No, it's interesting," Vivian assured her, surprised to find she meant it. "You clearly care deeply about creating spaces that serve people well. That's the whole point, isn't it? Using our skills to improve lives in some way." Eleanor looked at Vivian curiously. "Is that what drew you to beauty and fashion? The desire to help people?" The question caught Vivian off guard. Few people asked about her motivations. Most assumed she'd chosen her career out of vanity or a superficial love of beauty. "Partly," she admitted after a moment. I've always been interested in transformation, the power of small changes to significantly alter perception. But honestly, she hesitated, then decided to speak truthfully. I grew up feeling invisible, plain, awkward, overlooked. When I learned how to present myself differently, suddenly the world responded differently too. Doors opened. Opportunities appeared. She shrugged, feeling unexpectedly vulnerable. I wanted to give that power to others. Eleanor studied her with those perceptive eyes. That's not what I expected. Most people assume beauty professionals are just capitalizing on insecurity. Some are, Vivian acknowledged, but at its best, what I do is about possibility, not inadequacy, about helping people align their outer presentation with their inner sense of self. Eleanor nodded slowly. I can understand that. It's not unlike what I try to do with buildings, align the external structure with the human needs it serves. The parallel struck Vivian as surprisingly apt. They were both, in their own ways, working to harmonize form and function, though in vastly different domains. As they finished lunch and prepared to continue shopping, Vivian's phone buzzed with a text from Garrett. "Where are you? Thought we were meeting with the financial advisor at 2?" She had completely forgotten their appointment. More disturbing was the realization that she'd been enjoying Eleanor's company so much that thoughts of Garrett and his betrayal had temporarily receded from her mind. "Everything okay?" Eleanor asked, noticing her expression. "Fine," Vivian replied, quickly texting Garrett that she was running late. "Just a scheduling conflict. Shall we continue?" They spent another hour completing Eleanor's wardrobe essentials before parting ways outside the last boutique. Eleanor, laden with shopping bags, thanked Vivian with unexpected warmth. "This was actually fun," she admitted, "and educational. I feel like I've gained a new skill set today." "You're a quick learner," Vivian said. "Next week we'll work on hair and makeup techniques you can manage on your own. Simple, efficient routines that won't eat into your morning." As she watched Eleanor walk away, her posture already subtly improved by better-fitting clothes, Vivian felt a confusing mixture of emotions. Professional satisfaction in a successful consultation, yes, but also a disquieting sense of connection with the very woman she had intended to despise. When she finally met Garrett at their financial advisor's office, he was irritable from waiting. "Where were you?" he demanded as they walked to the parking garage afterward. "It's not like you to forget appointments." "I was working with a client," she replied coolly. "Shopping consultation. It ran longer than expected." "The architect?" Garrett asked, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. "Yes, as a matter of fact," Vivian said, watching his face carefully. "She's quite an interesting woman. Very passionate about her work." Garrett's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm sure she is." "We had lunch together after shopping," Vivian continued, pressing the advantage. "Did you know she's designing an innovative mixed-income housing development? Such meaningful work, creating spaces for people who are typically overlooked by high-end architects." "Fascinating," Garrett muttered, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I think so," Vivian agreed innocently. "It's refreshing to meet someone so dedicated to making a positive impact, rather than just chasing prestige or profit." The implied criticism hung between them as they drove home in strained silence. Vivian knew she was being cruel, deliberately provoking him, but couldn't seem to stop herself. Some part of her wanted him to know that she saw something valuable in Eleanor, something beyond the ordinary appearance that had initially shocked her. That evening, as they moved through their penthouse like polite strangers, Vivian found herself wondering what Garrett and Eleanor talked about during their meetings. Did he know about her projects, her passions? Did he value her mind, as well as whatever else she offered him? Or was their relationship as superficial as the facade of their marriage had become? The following Tuesday, Vivian returned to the cafe across from the hotel, half expecting to see Garrett and Eleanor meet for their usual lunch. But only Garrett appeared, checking his watch repeatedly, and eventually leaving alone, his expression a mixture of concern and irritation. Eleanor had stood him up. Vivian felt an unexpected surge of satisfaction, followed immediately by guilt. She was interfering in their relationship, even if unintentionally. The shopping excursion had been scheduled at the exact time Eleanor would normally meet Garrett. A coincidence Vivian hadn't planned, but now recognized as significant. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Had to reschedule hair appointment. Unexpected client meeting. So sorry for the late notice. Available Thursday instead? Vivian stared at the message, wondering if the client meeting was genuine, or if Eleanor had other reasons for changing their appointment. Perhaps Garrett had warned her after all. Or maybe she was simply busy with her actual work. The award-winning architectural projects Vivian now knew she was genuinely passionate about. Thursday works, she replied after a moment. 3 o'clock at my studio. When Thursday arrived, Vivian prepared for Eleanor's appointment with uncharacteristic nervousness. She had selected several hair product samples specifically suited to Eleanor's texture and lifestyle needs, and had arranged for her favorite stylist to provide a consultation on a cut that would be both flattering and low maintenance. But as she waited in the studio, arranging and rearranging the products on the consultation table, Vivian found herself questioning her own motives. Was she still gathering information to eventually confront Garrett? Was she trying to improve Eleanor out of some misguided competitive instinct? Or was she genuinely beginning to care about helping this woman present her best self to the world? The answer eluded her, and then Eleanor arrived, looking harried but excited in one of the new outfits they had purchased together. Slim-fitting charcoal trousers paired with a jewel-toned blouse that brought warmth to her complexion. "Sorry I'm late," she apologized, setting down her portfolio. "Client presentation ran over. But look, I wore the new clothes and even tried that 5-minute makeup routine you showed me." Vivian studied her with a professional eye, noting the subtle improvements in her appearance. The minimal makeup enhanced her features without looking obvious, and the better-fitting clothes highlighted her natural grace. "You look lovely," she said honestly. "Those colors suit you perfectly." Eleanor beamed, and Vivian felt that unexpected pang again. Pride in her work mingled with guilt about her intentions. The hair consultation went smoothly, with Eleanor agreeing to a subtly layered cut that would enhance her natural texture while requiring minimal styling. As the stylist worked, Eleanor shared stories about her latest project meeting, describing a breakthrough moment when a particularly skeptical investor had finally understood her vision for the development. He actually said, "I think your appearance threw me off initially," Eleanor recounted, rolling her eyes, "as if my design concepts would somehow be different if I wore more makeup." But then he admitted that after seeing the 3D renderings, he was completely convinced. "Men can be surprisingly shallow," Vivian commented, thinking of Garrett. "Some are," Eleanor agreed, "though I've worked with plenty who see beyond surface impressions. My regular engineering consultant, for instance, he's always valued my ideas regardless of how I present them." Vivian's heart skipped a beat. Was Eleanor referring to Garrett? She wanted to ask more, but hesitated to appear too interested. "That's fortunate," she said carefully. "A good professional partnership is valuable." "It is," Eleanor agreed warmly, "though I haven't seen him much lately. He's been oddly distant the past couple of weeks." Before Vivian could respond to this tantalizing comment, Eleanor's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. "I should take this," she said apologetically. "It's that engineer I mentioned." Vivian nodded, her mouth suddenly dry, as Eleanor stepped away to answer the call. She could hear only Eleanor's side of the conversation, professional, friendly, but with an undercurrent of tension. "Yes, I got your messages. No, I've been genuinely busy with the Riverside project. Tomorrow? I don't know, Garrett. My schedule is pretty full." Hearing her husband's name spoken aloud by his mistress sent a jolt through Vivian. Until this moment, there had been a surreal quality to the situation, as if she were observing someone else's life rather than her own. Now, the reality crashed down on her with undeniable force. Eleanor returned, looking troubled. "Sorry about that. Where were we?" "Your hair looks fantastic," Vivian said automatically, professional training taking over despite her inner turmoil. "The layers frame your face beautifully." "It does feel lighter," Eleanor agreed, running her fingers through the newly styled locks. "And I can tell it will be much easier to manage." They completed the consultation, with Vivian demonstrating simple styling techniques and recommending products that would work with Eleanor's busy lifestyle. Throughout the remainder of their session, Vivian maintained her professional demeanor, but internally, her thoughts were chaotic. Eleanor had referred to Garrett as her engineering consultant, had mentioned his recent distance, had sounded reluctant to meet with him. What exactly was the nature of their relationship? Vivian had assumed a romantic affair based on what she'd witnessed, but could she have misinterpreted things? As Eleanor prepared to leave, gathering her new products and styling tools, she paused by the door. "I wanted to thank you again," she said sincerely, "not just for the advice about clothes and makeup, but for treating me with respect throughout this process. You never made me feel inadequate or judged for my lack of knowledge in this area. That means a lot." The genuine gratitude in Eleanor's voice made Vivian's carefully constructed anger begin to crumble. How could she continue to hate this woman who stood before her, earnest and appreciative, completely unaware of their connection through Garrett? "You're welcome," she managed, her voice tight with emotion she couldn't fully identify. That's important to me, treating clients with respect." After Eleanor left, Vivian sat alone in her studio, staring at her reflection in the large consultation mirror. The perfect makeup, the expertly highlighted hair, the designer outfit, all the external markers of success she had cultivated so carefully over the years. She looked exactly as she had intended. Beautiful, polished, in control. And yet, she had never felt more lost. The revelation came on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Vivian's first meeting with Eleanor. They had scheduled a final consultation, a review of Eleanor's complete transformation, and a discussion about maintaining her new look moving forward. But as Vivian prepared her studio, arranging before and after photos and organizing style notes, her phone rang with a call from an unfamiliar number. "Is this Vivian Blake Harrington?" a woman's voice asked when she answered. "Yes, this is Vivian," she replied cautiously, noting the use of her full married name, a detail she had carefully concealed from Eleanor. "My name is Catherine Dowd. I'm Eleanor's sister." The woman's tone was measured, but held an unmistakable edge. "I think we need to talk about what you're doing to my sister." Vivian's heart hammered in her chest. "I'm not sure what you mean. I've been providing image consulting services to Eleanor at her request." "Under false pretenses," Catherine countered. "I found your wedding photo in a magazine profile about your cosmetics line. You're married to Garrett Harrington, the same man who's been working with Eleanor on her development projects for the past year." The directness of the accusation left no room for denial. Vivian sank into her chair, clutching the phone tightly. "How did you—" Eleanor mentioned her exciting new consultations with the famous Vivian Blake. "She was so impressed by your generosity, trading services instead of charging your usual exorbitant fees. It seemed odd to me, so I did some research." Catherine's voice hardened. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish here? Spying on your husband? Humiliating my sister?" "It's complicated," Vivian managed, her carefully constructed plan collapsing around her. "I'm sure it is," Catherine replied coolly. "And I'm giving you 24 hours to come clean to Eleanor yourself, or I will. She deserves to know who she's been dealing with." The line went dead, leaving Vivian staring at her phone in stunned silence. 24 hours. Less, actually, since Eleanor was due to arrive for her final consultation in just 3 hours. Vivian's first impulse was to cancel, to buy herself more time to think. But as she reached for her phone to send a postponement text, she hesitated. Would more time really change anything? The truth was bound to come out now, one way or another. Perhaps it was better to face it directly, on her own terms. With trembling hands, she began to gather evidence. Credit card statements showing Garrett's hotel charges, photos she'd taken of them together, the calendar entries with Eleanor's initials. If she was going to reveal everything, she might as well be thorough. When Eleanor arrived promptly at 3, she was smiling and energetic, clearly pleased with her recent transformation. She wore one of their carefully selected outfits, a structured navy dress that highlighted her slim figure, paired with simple gold accessories and low heels. Her newly styled hair fell in soft layers around her face, and she'd applied the subtle makeup techniques Vivian had taught her. The overall effect was striking. Not a dramatic change, but a refinement that brought her natural beauty into focus. "I had the most amazing client meeting this morning," she announced as she entered the studio. "The developer actually asked who'd been advising me on my new look. Said I seemed more confident, more authoritative somehow." She laughed, setting down her bag. "I told him it was all your doing." Vivian forced a smile, her stomach churning with anxiety. "You look wonderful. The credit is yours for implementing the suggestions so well." Eleanor tilted her head, studying Vivian with those perceptive eyes. "Is everything okay? You seem tense." It was now or never. Vivian took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. "Eleanor, before we continue, there's something important I need to tell you. Something I should have told you from the beginning." Eleanor's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "What is it?" "My full name isn't just Vivian Blake. It's Vivian Blake Harrington." She watched Eleanor's face carefully, looking for a flicker of recognition. There was none. "Okay," Eleanor said slowly. "I'm not sure why that matters. I'm married to Garrett Harrington," Vivian continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The engineer you've been working with. The man you meet for lunch at the Arterial Hotel every Tuesday and Thursday." Eleanor's eyes widened, her face draining of color. "What? How do you—" She stopped abruptly, the implications sinking in. "You've been watching us? Is that what this is about? You think Garrett and I are—" "I saw you together," Vivian interrupted, pulling out her phone and showing Eleanor a photo she'd taken of them kissing goodbye outside the hotel. "I saw this, and everything that followed." Eleanor stared at the photo, her expression shifting from shock to horror to something like dawning comprehension. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You thought all this time? You thought—" She sat down heavily on the nearby chair, shaking her head. "Vivian, Garrett and I are not having an affair." "I saw you," Vivian insisted, though a seed of doubt had begun to grow. "The way he looks at you, the regular meetings, the kiss goodbye." "He kisses me on the cheek," Eleanor cut in. "It's a greeting, nothing more." She looked up, meeting Vivian's gaze directly. "Garrett and I are partners in a community development initiative. We've been working together for over a year on affordable housing projects. He's my engineering consultant. And yes, we're friends. But there's nothing romantic between us." Vivian wanted to believe her, but the evidence seemed clear. "You meet in a hotel restaurant twice a week. Because it's convenient to both our offices and has private tables where we can spread out drawings and blueprints," Eleanor explained, her voice taking on an edge of frustration. "We're designing housing for underserved communities. The Waterview project? The one I've been telling you about? Garrett is the lead structural engineer. He's been essential to making the designs both innovative and affordable." The certainty that had fueled Vivian's anger for weeks began to waver. "But he never mentioned any of this to me. He's been lying about where he goes, who he sees." Eleanor looked genuinely confused. Why would he hide professional meetings from his wife? Then her expression changed, a new understanding dawning. "Unless, does he know about your attitude toward community projects? That you might consider them beneath your lifestyle?" The question struck uncomfortably close to home. Hadn't Vivian made her disdain for do-gooder work clear on multiple occasions? Hadn't she pushed Garrett toward prestigious corporate projects that paid well but left him increasingly dissatisfied? That still doesn't explain why he lied, Vivian said, though her conviction was weakening. Or why you've been distant from him recently. Eleanor sighed, running a hand through her newly styled hair. Because 3 weeks ago, Garrett told me he's been diverting funds from his corporate projects to subsidize our community work, using accounting tricks to channel money from wealthy clients to support affordable housing initiatives. She met Vivian's gaze directly. It's not exactly legal, Vivian. When I found out, I told him we needed to pause our collaboration until he found legitimate funding sources. That's why I've been avoiding his calls. The revelation hit Vivian like a physical blow. Not an affair, but financial impropriety. Not betrayal of their marriage vows, but betrayal of his professional ethics. Somehow, it seemed both better and worse than what she had imagined. "I don't understand," she said, her voice small. "Why wouldn't he tell me? Why go to such lengths to hide this?" Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "From what Garrett has shared about your expectations, I gathered that you value financial success and prestige quite highly. Perhaps he feared you wouldn't support his desire to focus on less profitable but more meaningful work." The observation stung with its accuracy. How many times had Vivian steered Garrett away from projects that didn't align with the image she wanted to project? How often had she dismissed his interest in community development as an impractical dream? "So all this time," Vivian said slowly, "while I've been giving you makeover advice with ulterior motives, you've been completely innocent of what I suspected." Eleanor nodded, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "And while you've been suspicious of me, I've been admiring you, learning from you." She laughed mirthlessly. Life has a twisted sense of humor, doesn't it? They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, the weight of misunderstanding and mistrust hanging heavy between them. "What happens now?" Eleanor finally asked. It was a question Vivian had no ready answer for. Her carefully orchestrated plan of revenge had been built on a false premise. The woman she had intended to humiliate was guilty of nothing beyond befriending her husband professionally. "I don't know," Vivian admitted. "I need to talk to Garrett." Eleanor nodded, gathering her belongings. "I think that's wise." She paused at the door, turning back with unexpected compassion. "For what it's worth, Vivian, he speaks of you with great admiration. Whatever issues exist in your marriage, I don't believe lack of love is among them." After Eleanor left, Vivian sat motionless in her studio, surrounded by the trappings of her successful career. The awards, the magazine covers featuring her work, the photographs of celebrities she had transformed, all the external validation she had pursued so relentlessly throughout her adult life. Yet in this moment of clarity, she recognized how hollow much of it felt. She had been so focused on appearances that she had missed the substance of her own marriage, the gradual estrangement, the diverging values, the breakdown in communication that had allowed such profound misunderstandings to fester. That evening, when Garrett arrived home, Vivian was waiting for him in their living room, the evidence of his financial misdeeds spread out on the coffee table before her. She had spent hours tracing the money trail after Eleanor's revelation, using her access to their accounts to confirm what the architect had told her. "We need to talk," she said simply, as he entered. Garrett took one look at the documents, and his face fell. There was no denial, no attempt to deflect or defend. He simply sat down across from her, shoulders slumped in defeat. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "I found out today," she replied. "From Eleanor Dowd." His head snapped up at that. "You've spoken to Eleanor? How?" "I've been doing more than speaking to her, Garrett. I've been giving her image consultations for the past 3 weeks. Vivian's voice was steady, though her emotions were anything but. "I saw you with her outside the hotel last month. I thought you were having an affair." Comprehension dawned on his face, followed quickly by disbelief. "An affair? With Eleanor? That's absurd. She's a colleague, a friend. We're working on the Waterview project together." "So she explained," Vivian said. What she also explained was your creative accounting methods for funding these projects. She gestured to the financial documents before them. Did you think I wouldn't find out eventually? Did you think I wouldn't care that my husband was committing fraud? Garrett ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she knew well. It's not fraud exactly. It's reallocation. The corporate clients can afford it. They're paying for my expertise, and I deliver quality work. They just don't know they're also subsidizing housing for families who would otherwise be priced out of decent neighborhoods. That's still fraud, Garrett, Vivian insisted, though with less heat than she might have expected. It's illegal, and it's wrong, regardless of your noble intentions. I know, he admitted, meeting her gaze directly. I started small, just padding budgets slightly, directing the excess to the community projects. But it grew. The need was so great, and the corporate work so lucrative, it was easy to justify. Why didn't you tell me? Vivian asked, the hurt in her voice unmistakable. Why all the secrecy? Garrett laughed humorlessly. Tell you? Vivian, every time I mentioned wanting to do more community-focused work, you shut it down. You called it charity cases and career suicide. You pushed me toward the high-profile projects that would look good in your social circles. The accuracy of his assessment made her wince. So, you just decided to lie instead? To risk everything we've built together? I didn't see another way, he said simply. I was suffocating in the corporate world, designing soulless buildings for clients who only cared about profit margins. The work with Eleanor, creating spaces that actually improve lives, that's what gives me purpose. He looked at her with unexpected intensity. When was the last time you felt true purpose in your work, Vivienne? Not just success or validation, but genuine meaning? The question struck her with surprising force. When had she last felt that her work mattered beyond the superficial transformations, beyond the commercial success? She thought of Eleanor's passion for her community projects, the light in her eyes when she described creating spaces that fostered connection and dignity. I used to, she said softly. When I first started, I believed I was helping people find confidence, helping them align their outer appearance with their inner worth. She gestured around their luxurious apartment. Somewhere along the way, it became more about status and less about substance. Garrett's expression softened. We've both lost our way, haven't we? The simple acknowledgement broke something open between them, a recognition of shared responsibility for the state of their marriage, for the distance that had grown so gradually they had barely noticed until it became an unbridgeable chasm. What do we do now? Vivian asked, echoing Eleanor's earlier question. Garrett considered this carefully. First, I need to come clean about the financial irregularities. Find a legal way to support the community projects, or step away from them entirely. He met her gaze steadily. And we need to decide if there's anything left between us worth salvaging. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with 15 years of shared history and an uncertain future. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning reminiscent of the day she had first seen Garrett and Eleanor outside the hotel, Vivian stood on the construction site of the Waterview development. She wore practical boots and jeans, a far cry from her usual polished appearance, and her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Beside her, Eleanor reviewed blueprints with a contractor, her newly confident presentation style evident in her posture and clear directives. Garrett was gone, not from Vivian's life entirely, but from their marriage. The legal consequences of his financial improprieties had been significant, but not devastating. With a prestigious law firm behind him, hired by Vivian in a final act of marital support, he had negotiated a settlement that included substantial community service and financial restitution, but avoided jail time. Their divorce had been amicable, if painful, a mutual recognition that they had grown in fundamentally different directions. Garrett had moved to a smaller city where he was working with a nonprofit architectural firm, focusing exclusively on community development projects. this time with transparent funding and proper financial oversight. And Vivienne? She had surprised everyone, including herself, by redirecting her career. She still provided image consulting, but with a new focus and mission. The Beauty Beyond project she had founded in partnership with Eleanor provided professional styling, makeup services, and interview clothing for women transitioning from homelessness or domestic violence situations into the workforce. The outward transformation served a deeper purpose, helping these women reclaim their confidence and present themselves effectively in professional settings. The contractor says we're on schedule for completion next month, Eleanor reported, joining Vivienne at the edge of the site. She looked polished, but practical in one of the outfits they had selected together. Her natural beauty enhanced rather than overshadowed by the subtle styling techniques Vivienne had taught her. The community center will be ready for the holiday gathering. That's wonderful, Vivienne said, genuinely pleased. The Waterview project had become something of a passion for her too, a chance to apply her understanding of aesthetics to spaces that would serve real human needs rather than merely project status. "Have you heard from Garrett recently?" Eleanor asked carefully. Though initially horrified by the deception Vivienne had practiced, she had gradually come to understand the complicated emotions that had driven it. Over time, an unlikely friendship had formed between the two women, tentative at first, then increasingly genuine. "He called last week," Vivienne replied. "The Portland project is going well. He sounds content." She smiled slightly, remembering the conversation. "He mentioned he's seeing someone, another architect in the firm, someone who shares his values from the outset this time." "And how do you feel about that?" Eleanor asked. Vivienne considered the question honestly. "Relieved, actually, that we're both finding our way forward." She glanced at Eleanor. "What about you? Any progress with that structural engineer from the East Side project? The one who can't stop staring at you during meetings?" Eleanor laughed, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "We're having dinner tomorrow night. I'm wearing that burgundy dress you insisted I buy." "Excellent choice," Vivienne approved. "He won't know what hit him." As they walked through the half-completed development, discussing design details and community programming, Vivienne reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She had set out to humiliate a woman she perceived as a rival, only to find an unexpected friend and ally. She had sought to protect a marriage that, in truth, had ceased to meet either partner's needs long ago. And in the process of losing what she thought she wanted, she had rediscovered what she truly needed: purpose, authenticity, and genuine connection. Later that evening, as Vivienne prepared for a fundraising event for Beauty Beyond, she studied her reflection in the mirror. Her makeup was still flawless, her outfit still carefully chosen, but something fundamental had shifted in how she saw herself and her work in the world. The irony wasn't lost on her that Eleanor, the woman she had once judged so harshly for her lack of polish, had helped her recognize the superficiality in her own carefully curated life. That in attempting to transform Eleanor's appearance, Vivienne had experienced a far more profound transformation of her own values and priorities. She thought of the title of the talk she would give tonight: Beyond the Surface, Beauty as a Tool for Empowerment, Not Definition. It represented everything she had learned through her encounter with Eleanor and the painful but necessary dissolution of her marriage. The woman who stared back at her from the mirror was still beautiful, still polished, but now those qualities served a purpose beyond mere appearance. They were tools in her arsenal, rather than the sum total of her worth. "What an unexpected plot twist," she murmured to her reflection, smiling at the thought of how differently things had turned out from what she had planned that day outside the hotel. She had lost a husband, but gained a clearer understanding of herself. She had intended to humiliate a rival only to find a friend and collaborator. She had sought revenge but discovered redemption instead. And perhaps most surprisingly of all, the woman she had once dismissed as horrible-looking had shown her the true meaning of beauty. Not in perfectly applied makeup or designer clothes, but in authenticity, purpose, and the courage to live according to one's deepest values. As Vivian turned away from the mirror and headed out to share her new vision with others, she felt a sense of genuine peace for the first time in years. The path forward wasn't perfect or certain, but it was real, as authentic and unpolished as life itself. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.